I want to begin by saying something that may sound shocking, but it changed my life forever. For 3 minutes, my heart stopped, my breath left my body. Doctors later told me I was clinically dead. But what happened in those 3 minutes taught me more than decades of study, prayer, and struggle. And the message I was shown was not about religion, denominations, or titles. It was about truth, and it answered the question that haunted me my entire life. Why was I still poor despite believing in God? Poverty is not always financial. It often begins in belief, and this was the most confronting truth revealed in those 3 minutes beyond the boundary of life. When everything familiar fell away, identity, titles, religious knowledge, years of prayer, what remained was the raw core of what I truly believed about myself, about God, and about provision. And that is where the real poverty was exposed. Not in my wallet, not in my circumstances, but in the quiet assumptions I carried every day without questioning them. I had believed in God sincerely. I had spoken holy words. I had followed spiritual disciplines. Yet deep inside, there was a belief I never dared to say out loud. That abundance was meant for others, not for me. That some people were chosen to receive ease, overflow, and opportunity, while people like me were meant to struggle quietly and call it virtue. That belief did not come from heaven. It came from fear disguised as humility. But belief, whether holy or broken, is powerful. It shapes decisions, reactions, and expectations long before money ever enters the picture. In that revealed space, I saw how belief works like a lens. 2 people can receive the same opportunity. One sees possibility, the other sees risk. One moves forward, the other hesitates. Over time, those small responses compound into radically different lives. I realized that many of my prayers had been sincere, but my expectations were small. I asked God to bless me while silently preparing myself for disappointment. I prayed for provision while emotionally bracing for lack. And what shocked me most was understanding that heaven had been responding to what I truly believed, not to what I merely said. Belief is not a statement, it is an agreement. It is what you expect to happen when no one is watching. It is what guides your choices when logic and fear compete. I believed God was good, but I did not believe His goodness included my financial life. I believed miracles were real, but I believed stability was unrealistic. I believed provision was possible, but I believed it would always be temporary. That belief kept me stuck in cycles, money arriving and leaving, opportunities appearing and dissolving, progress starting and stopping. What was revealed to me was this: lack survives where unworthiness lives, not because God withholds, but because the soul resists receiving. When someone believes they must struggle to be righteous, they will sabotage ease. When someone believes abundance makes them selfish, they will reject growth. When someone believes money is dangerous, they will never feel safe holding it. These beliefs operate silently, yet they govern outcomes with relentless consistency. I was shown moments where help came and I declined it. Moments where ideas sparked and I dismissed them. Moments where growth required confidence and I chose familiarity instead. And each time, the reason was the same. I did not believe I was meant to rise. I believed survival was spiritual, but expansion was suspicious. That belief shaped everything. Poverty, then, is not simply the absence of money. It is the presence of internal resistance. It is the habit of expecting less. It is preparing for failure even while praying for success. It is praising God with words while doubting His intention with outcomes. And as long as that contradiction exists, progress feels exhausting and unstable. The most liberating realization was this: beliefs can be changed. They are learned, not inherited. They are reinforced by repetition, not truth. The moment I returned, the work was no longer about asking God to do more. It was about allowing myself to believe differently, to believe that provision does not corrupt character, to believe that rest is not laziness, to believe that abundance can coexist with humility, to believe that God's generosity does not end where my comfort zone begins. When belief changes, behavior changes naturally, fear loosens its grip, decisions become clearer, action feels safer, and money, which once felt heavy and unstable, becomes a tool rather than a test. Opportunities are no longer threatening, they are invitations. Growth no longer feels arrogant, it feels responsible. This is why some people pray constantly yet remain stuck, while others move forward with quiet confidence. It is not effort that separates them, it is belief. One believes struggle is holy, the other believes stewardship is sacred. One believes lack keeps them pure, the other believes provision allows them to serve. Heaven responds to alignment, not intensity. The truth is uncomfortable but freeing. God does not argue with what you believe. Life organizes itself around your deepest assumptions. If you believe you must fight for every inch, life will feel like a battle. If you believe you are allowed to receive, life begins to open. Not instantly, not magically, but consistently. In conclusion, the reason many remain poor despite faith is not because God is absent, silent, or unwilling. It is because belief has quietly set a ceiling where God intended an open sky. Change the belief and the ceiling disappears. When worthiness replaces guilt, when trust replaces fear, when expectation replaces survival thinking, provision finds room to stay. Poverty ends not when money arrives, but when the belief that you were never meant to have it finally leaves. Faith without alignment is one of the most misunderstood spiritual conditions, because from the outside it looks like devotion, discipline, and sincerity. Yet internally it creates conflict. This was the second truth revealed with painful clarity. Faith that is not aligned blocks provision, not because God refuses to bless, but because the inner life is divided. Alignment means that belief, words, decisions, and expectations are moving in the same direction. When they are not, progress becomes unstable, exhausting, and inconsistent. I believed in God, I prayed. I spoke words of gratitude, but my daily choices told a different story. I spoke about trust, yet I made decisions rooted in fear. I spoke about hope, yet I planned for failure. I spoke about abundance, yet I avoided responsibility. This inner contradiction created a kind of spiritual static. It was not rebellion, it was confusion. And confusion does not stop prayer from being heard, but it does stop clarity from being released. In that revealed moment beyond life, I saw how alignment works like a channel. When the channel is clear, provision flows naturally. When the channel is clogged with mixed signals, flow becomes restricted. I saw how often I asked for doors to open while standing far from them. I asked for increase while refusing expansion. I prayed for stability while remaining emotionally attached to uncertainty. None of this was intentional. It was habitual. Faith, I learned, is not intensity of emotion. It is consistency of direction. You can pray loudly and still walk in circles. You can quote scripture and still undermine its outcome through daily hesitation. Alignment requires that what you ask for is supported by what you do. Heaven does not contradict itself, and when a person lives in contradiction, they feel stuck between effort and exhaustion. One of the clearest images I was shown was this: trying to move forward while constantly looking back. That is what misaligned faith feels like. You ask for growth, but you measure yourself by past limitations. You ask for opportunity, but you cling to safety. You ask for provision, but you resist structure, discipline, and responsibility. Growth requires expansion, and expansion always demands a new way of thinking. I realized that many prayers were actually requests for relief, not transformation. Relief asks God to make the situation easier without changing the person. Transformation asks God to make the person capable of handling more. I wanted the reward of growth without the discomfort of alignment, But alignment is what prepares you to sustain blessing without fear. Misalignment also shows up in how people speak. Words carry direction. When gratitude is spoken but complaint is rehearsed internally, alignment breaks. When faith is declared publicly but doubt is fed privately, alignment breaks. When generosity is praised but scarcity is trusted, alignment breaks. These fractures are subtle, but they determine outcomes. I was shown how provision often arrived at the edge of my comfort, not inside it. Each time I paused, each time I overthought, each time I delayed. Delay felt wise, but it was fear wearing the mask of discernment. Alignment would have meant acting with calm confidence instead of endless analysis. Alignment would have meant trusting that obedience creates clarity, not the other way around. When faith aligns, effort decreases and effectiveness increases. You are no longer pushing against yourself. Decisions feel cleaner. Direction feels simpler. You stop asking the same questions repeatedly because your actions finally answer them. Life begins to respond, not dramatically, but steadily. The greatest lie I believed was that alignment required perfection. It does not. It requires honesty. Honest awareness of where your actions disagree with your prayers. Honest acknowledgement of where fear still has authority. Honest willingness to adjust direction instead of demanding instant results. Once alignment begins, peace replaces anxiety, not because challenges disappear, but because resistance does. You stop fighting growth and start cooperating with it. Money stops feeling spiritual and emotional at the same time. It becomes practical. Opportunities stop feeling threatening. They feel appropriate. In conclusion, faith without alignment creates motion without progress. It drains energy while producing little fruit. But aligned faith creates momentum. When belief, words, actions, and expectations move together, provision no longer feels forced. It feels ordered. Heaven is not impressed by how much we ask, but by how consistently we walk in the direction of what we ask for. When alignment replaces contradiction, the block disappears, and what once felt delayed begins to arrive naturally. What was revealed next was both comforting and unsettling at the same time. Heaven responds to expectation, not desperation. I had lived much of my spiritual life believing that intensity, urgency, and emotional pleading were signs of strong faith. I thought that the more desperate I sounded, the more heaven would move. But what I was shown was that desperation does not attract provision. It repels stability. Expectation, on the other hand, creates space for things to arrive and remain. Desperation is rooted in fear. It says, if this does not happen now, I will collapse. It turns prayer into pressure and faith into survival. Expectation is different. Expectation says, I know what is coming even if I cannot see it yet. One demands relief, the other trusts order. One tries to force heaven's hand, the other aligns with heaven's timing. I realized that many of my prayers had been sincere but anxious, filled with urgency rather than certainty. I was shown moments where I prayed hardest at the point of panic. Bills due, opportunities slipping, time running out. And each time, my inner posture was not trust but fear of loss. I was asking God to rescue me from consequences instead of preparing myself to steward outcomes. Desperation narrows vision. It makes people grab instead of receive. It creates short-term relief but long-term instability. Expectation, however, is calm. It does not beg. It prepares. It plans. It behaves as though the answer is already on its way. Expectation changes how you speak, how you wait, and how you act. When someone truly expects provision, they do not panic at delay. They do not compromise values to escape pressure. They do not chase every option out of fear of missing out. They stay steady. I saw how often desperation led me to accept less than what was right. Less pay, less respect, less growth, simply because I feared having nothing. And each time, I reinforced the belief that survival was my ceiling. Heaven was not withholding, I was settling. Desperation made me reactive. Expectation would have made me selective. One of the clearest lessons was this: desperation speaks to lack, expectation speaks to sufficiency. What you consistently speak to gains authority in your life. When your inner dialogue is filled with "what if it doesn't work?" and "what if this is my last chance?" you are training your nervous system to expect loss. Heaven does not partner with panic. It partners with trust. Expectation does not mean passivity. It means readiness. It means acting as someone who believes the future is supported. Desperation waits anxiously for something to save it. Expectation builds capacity to receive what is coming. This is why some people pray constantly but never prepare, while others quietly prepare and watch doors open. I was shown how expectation affects timing. Desperation wants immediate results because it is driven by discomfort. Expectation is patient because it is driven by confidence. Many blessings require preparation to be sustainable. When desperation pulls something in too early, it collapses under pressure. When expectation waits, it receives at the right moment. This also changed how I understood patience. Patience is not delay without hope. It is waiting with confidence. Desperation waits with dread. Expectation waits with peace. One drains energy, the other preserves it. One keeps you focused on what you lack. The other keeps you focused on what you are becoming. I realized that heaven often tests expectation through silence, not absence, but quiet. Silence reveals whether trust is real or conditional. If faith collapses when answers are delayed, it was desperation wearing the mask of belief. Expectation remains steady even when nothing seems to move, because it is anchored in character, not circumstances. The shift from desperation to expectation changed how I lived. I stopped chasing quick fixes. I stopped measuring progress by urgency. I stopped making decisions out of pressure. And slowly, without force, things began to align. Conversations led to opportunities, ideas turned into income, stability replaced chaos. This does not mean challenges disappeared. It means challenges no longer controlled me. Expectation created emotional space. Space to think clearly, space to respond wisely, space for provision to arrive without panic. In conclusion, heaven responds to expectation because expectation reflects trust. Desperation reflects fear. Fear contracts, trust expands. When a person learns to expect good with calm confidence, life reorganizes itself around that posture. Doors open at the right time, not the rushed time. Provision arrives in forms that last, not ones that merely relieve pressure. Poverty persists where desperation rules, but it dissolves where expectation takes its place. When you stop begging for rescue and start preparing for arrival, heaven responds, not with chaos, but with order. One of the most difficult truths revealed was this: suffering is not proof of holiness. For years, I had quietly believed that struggle was a spiritual badge, that enduring lack somehow made me more righteous, more acceptable, more humble before God. I never said it openly, but I lived as if ease were suspicious and abundance were dangerous. That belief shaped my life more than any prayer ever did. I was shown how subtly this idea had taken root. Whenever things became difficult, I felt secretly affirmed, as if hardship itself were evidence that I was on the right path. When things improved, I grew uneasy, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Peace felt temporary. Stability felt undeserved. I mistook endurance for virtue and exhaustion for faithfulness, and without realizing it, I built an inner identity around struggle. The problem with this belief is not that suffering is meaningless. It is that suffering is not sacred by default. Pain can teach, refine, and awaken, but it can also simply repeat if its lesson is misunderstood. Holiness is not measured by how much you endure, but by how truthfully you live. I saw that many of my struggles were not refining me. They were reinforcing a false narrative that said God is honored when I remain small. I was shown scenes where opportunities for relief appeared, and I rejected them internally. Not consciously, but emotionally. I told myself stories like, "This is too good to last," or "If it were meant for me, it wouldn't be this easy." These thoughts felt humble, but they were rooted in fear and mistrust, not reverence. I had confused humility with self-denial and faith with endurance of pain. There is a deep difference between carrying a burden for a purpose and carrying a burden out of belief. One strengthens, the other erodes. I believed that struggle kept me pure, but what it actually did was keep me tired. Tired people are not more spiritual, they are more limited. Fatigue narrows vision, it reduces creativity, it weakens courage. And over time, it trains the soul to accept less than what is possible. I was shown that holiness is alignment with truth, not attachment to pain. God is not glorified by unnecessary suffering. Growth does not require constant hardship. Discipline does not require deprivation. These ideas may sound noble, but they subtly turn pain into an idol. When someone believes suffering makes them righteous, they will unconsciously resist healing. They will delay relief. They will distrust joy. I saw how often I judged progress in others as spiritual compromise simply because it looked easier than my own path. That judgment was a defense mechanism. If ease were valid, then my suffering would lose its meaning. So I protected the belief by calling it faith. But heaven does not measure devotion by difficulty. Heaven measures it by obedience, integrity, and love. This belief also affected how I prayed. I prayed for strength to endure instead of wisdom to change. I prayed for patience instead of clarity. I asked God to help me survive situations that were meant to be outgrown. Survival became my goal when growth was the invitation. And as long as survival was enough, transformation never became necessary. Suffering becomes dangerous when it is romanticized. It creates loyalty to pain. It convinces people that improvement is betrayal, that rest is weakness, that success is corruption. It keeps people trapped in cycles they call purpose. But God does not ask people to suffer to prove loyalty. Trust is proven through alignment, not exhaustion. I was shown that ease is not the enemy of faith, avoidance is. Comfort is not sin, stagnation is. Abundance is not corruption, misalignment is. When suffering has done its work, it is meant to release you, not rule you. Clinging to it does not make you holy. It makes you afraid to grow. The moment this belief loosened, something profound shifted. I no longer felt guilty for wanting stability. I no longer distrusted peace. I stopped interpreting struggle as confirmation and started interpreting it as information. Instead of asking, "How do I endure this?" I began asking, "What is this teaching me to change?" That single shift restored agency. Life did not instantly become easy, but it became honest. Challenges still came, but they no longer defined my identity. I stopped wearing pain as proof and started wearing responsibility as purpose. Growth felt cleaner. Decisions felt less burdened. I no longer needed to justify struggle to feel worthy. In conclusion, suffering is not proof of holiness. Truth is, alignment is, growth is. Pain may visit, but it is not meant to stay forever. When someone stops equating struggle with virtue, they finally allow themselves to heal, to receive, and to rise without guilt. God is not honored by how long you remain wounded, but by how willingly you step into wholeness when the door opens. When suffering is released from its false throne, faith becomes lighter, clearer, and far more powerful. Another truth that was revealed with striking clarity was this: opportunities are often missed when fear disguises itself as patience. I had always believed I was being wise, cautious, and discerning. I told myself I was waiting for the right timing, the right sign, the right confirmation. But what I was shown was uncomfortable. Many of those pauses were not wisdom at all. They were fear wearing spiritual language. Fear rarely announces itself honestly. It does not say, I am afraid to grow. It says, let me wait a little longer. It does not say, I don't trust myself to handle success. It says, I need to pray more. These statements sound faithful, responsible, and even mature, but beneath them is hesitation rooted in self, doubt and fear of change. I was not refusing opportunities, I was postponing them until they disappeared. I saw moments when doors opened gently without drama. A conversation, an invitation, an idea, a chance to step forward. Nothing felt forced, nothing felt dangerous, yet instead of moving, I delayed. I told myself that if it were truly meant for me, it would come again more clearly. But opportunity does not always knock loudly. Sometimes it whispers once and waits to see if you are listening. Fear thrives in familiarity. It prefers what is known, even if what is known is painful. Growth requires entering territory where identity shifts. New responsibility challenges old self-concepts. I realized that part of me was afraid of who I would become if things actually worked. Struggle had become familiar. Stability was unknown. So fear convinced me to wait, to delay, to hesitate. Patience is rooted in trust. Fear is rooted in avoidance. The difference between them is subtle but decisive. Patience prepares while it waits. Fear stalls while pretending to wait. Patience builds capacity. Fear protects comfort. I thought I was being patient, but I was not preparing. I was not growing. I was not stretching. I was standing still and calling it faith. I was shown how often delay cost more than failure ever would have. Missed timing leads to missed momentum. Confidence weakens when action is postponed too long. Opportunities often require response before certainty appears. Waiting for perfect clarity often means waiting until the door closes. I realized that clarity often follows obedience, not the other way around. Fear also disguises itself as overthinking, endless analysis, replaying scenarios, weighing every possible outcome. This feels intelligent, but it is often a way to avoid responsibility. At some point, thinking becomes a substitute for doing. Faith does not require recklessness, but it does require movement. Fear wants guarantees before steps are taken. Faith takes steps to receive guarantees. I saw how I used phrases like "I'm not ready yet," when readiness was actually built through action. No one becomes ready for growth by waiting. Readiness is formed by engagement. Muscles strengthen by use, not contemplation. Confidence grows by experience, not by delay. Every time I postponed action, I reinforced the belief that I was not capable. Fear-based patience also creates spiritual fatigue. Waiting without movement drains energy. Hope erodes. Motivation weakens. Over time, people begin to resent the very things they once prayed for. They grow cynical. They say opportunities never come, when in reality, they passed quietly by, while fear asked for more time. I was shown that many blessings come disguised as responsibility, not excitement, not ease, but weight. And fear resists weight. It wants comfort without burden. But growth always comes with responsibility. Increase demands management. Expansion demands discipline. Fear pretends to protect you from failure, but it actually protects you from becoming more. When I began to recognize fear's voice, something shifted. I stopped honoring hesitation as wisdom automatically. I began asking a different question. Is this delay producing growth, or is it producing stagnation? That question exposed truth quickly. If waiting did not involve preparation, learning, or movement, it was fear. Acting did not remove fear instantly, but action weakened it. Each step taken built evidence. Each decision made strengthened trust. Momentum replaced doubt, and slowly, opportunities no longer felt threatening, they felt appropriate. This did not mean rushing or forcing outcomes. It meant responding when life invited movement. It meant trusting that God does not open doors to mock us. It meant believing that if responsibility is offered, capacity can be grown. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear decide timing. In conclusion, many remain stuck not because doors are closed, but because fear convinces them to wait outside doors already open. Patience that produces growth is holy. Patience that produces avoidance is fear in disguise. When hesitation is questioned and courage is chosen, life begins to move again. Opportunities do not require perfection, they require response. And the moment fear loses authority over timing, progress begins to flow naturally. What was revealed next was a truth that challenged everything I thought I understood about provision. God funds responsibility, not fear. I had believed that if I prayed hard enough, believed strongly enough, and waited long enough, provision would arrive on its own. But what I was shown was that provision follows stewardship. Heaven responds to those who are willing to carry what they ask for. Fear asks for relief, responsibility prepares for trust. I saw how often I asked God to remove pressure without asking to grow capacity. I wanted ease without structure, increase without accountability, blessing without burden. But blessing is not light by default. It carries weight. It requires management, discipline, and clarity. Fear resists responsibility because responsibility exposes weakness. It demands consistency. It requires showing up even when motivation fades. Fear prays to escape consequences. Responsibility prays to handle outcomes. Fear wants God to fix the situation. Responsibility wants God to train the person. These are two very different requests, and heaven responds differently to each. When prayer is rooted in fear, it seeks comfort. When prayer is rooted in responsibility, it seeks capability. I was shown moments where provision was delayed not because I was unworthy, but because I was unprepared. I wanted increase, but my habits could not sustain it. I wanted stability, but my discipline was inconsistent. I wanted opportunity, but my focus was scattered. Fear avoided these truths by calling them limitations. Responsibility faced them and asked to grow. Provision is not just money. It is systems, habits, clarity, and consistency. Money flows where structure exists. Without structure, money becomes stress. Fear avoids structure because structure removes excuses. Responsibility welcomes structure because it creates freedom. This is why some people receive sudden provision and lose it quickly. It arrived before responsibility did. I realized that God does not reward panic. Panic creates chaos. Chaos wastes resources. Responsibility creates order, and order multiplies. When someone lives responsibly, they signal readiness. Readiness invites trust. Trust invites provision. This is not punishment or reward, it is order. Fear also avoids ownership. It blames circumstances, people, timing, or fate. Responsibility asks, what part is mine to carry? That question is powerful. It restores agency. It shifts focus from waiting to building. Every time responsibility is embraced, fear loses influence. I was shown that many prayers were sincere but incomplete. I asked God to bless my work without committing to excellence. I asked for financial breakthrough without learning financial stewardship. I asked for stability without embracing routine. Responsibility would have meant changing daily practices, not just spiritual language. Responsibility is not harsh, it is respectful. It says, I trust myself enough to grow. It says, I am willing to become the kind of person who can handle what I am asking for. Fear says, I hope this doesn't require too much from me. Heaven responds to the first posture. Once I embraced responsibility, fear did not disappear instantly, but it lost authority. I began building habits instead of waiting for miracles. I began learning instead of wishing. I began acting as a steward instead of a victim. And slowly, provision followed, not dramatically, but reliably. This shift changed how I viewed challenges. Challenges were no longer punishments, they were training. Pressure was not rejection, it was preparation. Responsibility reframed difficulty as investment. Every skill learned, every habit formed, Every boundary enforced created capacity for more. I stopped asking God to protect me from weight and started asking Him to strengthen me to carry it. That single change altered everything. Opportunities no longer felt overwhelming. Money no longer felt unstable. Growth no longer felt threatening. Responsibility made room for peace. In conclusion, God funds responsibility, not fear. Provision follows preparedness. When someone stops praying to escape life and starts praying to engage it, heaven responds. Blessing is not withheld, it is entrusted, and trust is given where responsibility is demonstrated. When fear steps aside and stewardship takes its place, provision no longer feels uncertain. It becomes ordered, sustainable, and purposeful. The final truth revealed was the most liberating of all. True wealth begins the moment trust replaces doubt. Not when money appears, not when circumstances change, not when problems disappear, but when the inner argument finally ends. Doubt keeps a person divided. Trust makes a person whole, and wholeness is where provision can finally rest. For most of my life, doubt lived quietly beneath my faith. I believed in God, but I doubted outcomes. I trusted promises, but questioned timing. I prayed for good, but prepared emotionally for disappointment. This constant inner negotiation drained energy. It created hesitation. It fractured focus. Doubt does not always sound negative. Sometimes it sounds cautious, realistic, or humble. But at its core, doubt says, I am not sure this will work out for me. Trust is not blind optimism. It is settled confidence. It does not deny challenges. It refuses to be ruled by them. Trust says, even if I do not see the path clearly, I know I am supported. That inner certainty changes everything. When trust is present, decisions become cleaner. Fear loses its urgency. Patience becomes peaceful instead of anxious. I was shown how doubt affects reception. Doubt receives blessings defensively. It holds loosely, expecting loss. It never fully relaxes. Trust receives openly. It allows good to settle without suspicion. This is why some people experience constant cycles of gain and loss. They believe blessing is temporary. Their nervous system never adjusts to stability, so instability follows. Doubt also creates self-sabotage. When something good arrives, doubt asks, how long will this last? That question subtly prepares the mind for failure. Behavior shifts, attention scatters, gratitude fades. Trust asks a different question. How do I care for this? That question invites stewardship instead of anxiety. I realized that wealth is not just accumulation, it is retention. Many people can attract money. Few can keep it peacefully. Trust is what allows money to stay without becoming a source of stress. Without trust, increase feels dangerous. With trust, increase feels manageable. Trust also affects identity. Doubt keeps a person stuck in past versions of themselves. It whispers, you are still who you used to be. Trust allows identity to update. It permits growth without guilt. It allows someone to say, I am becoming someone new, without fear of losing authenticity. This shift from doubt to trust is internal before it is external. No amount of evidence will convince someone who is committed to doubt. Evidence is interpreted through belief. When belief changes, evidence multiplies. Trust does not wait for proof. It creates conditions where proof can appear. I was shown that trust grows through action, not reckless action, but consistent, aligned movement. Every time I acted despite doubt, trust strengthened. Every time I honored responsibility, trust deepened. Over time, doubt lost credibility. It became a background noise instead of a governing voice. Trust also restores joy. Doubt turns life into a series of tests. Trust turns life into a process. Doubt asks, what if it fails? Trust asks, what is this teaching me? That shift reduces pressure. It allows learning without panic. It allows growth without self-attack. When trust replaced doubt, wealth stopped being the goal. Stability, peace, and purpose became the focus. And ironically, provision followed more easily. Money responded to clarity. opportunities aligned with confidence. Relationships strengthened around trustworthiness. This does not mean trust eliminates difficulty. It means difficulty no longer defines worth. Setbacks become information, not condemnation. Progress becomes sustainable. Life stops swinging between hope and despair. In conclusion, true wealth begins when trust replaces doubt because trust creates wholeness. Wholeness allows flow. When the inner conflict ends, life no longer resists itself. Provision finds room to arrive and remain. Peace becomes the foundation, and from that foundation, abundance grows naturally, not as something chased, but as something allowed.